When my wife Kim and I got married, we wanted to make sure that we had the same values, the same core beliefs, the same goals. The first thing on our goal list wasn't a big house, as most couples is. Our first goal was to build a business. And that's why we were homeless for a little while. We were actually homeless for about 3 weeks, which I write about in my new book, Cash Flow Quadrant. And people kept saying, why don't you get a job? I said, because I'm not looking for one. Good. What I was doing was focusing my brain and my emotions and my heart and everything and doggedly staying out there building my business so that I don't have to work in anymore. That once that business was up and running, I had 11 offices throughout the world, I could retire. So by the time I was 40, I was out of the rat race. I was finished. We didn't go and buy a bigger house. Our next goal was to buy 2 houses per year. So when Kim and I got together, our goals, our focus, our whole reticular activated system, building a business and acquiring assets or other houses, other businesses, stocks, bonds. A lot of people think net worth is important. Net worth is nothing because most of it is bogus anyway. What really counts is how much is your cash flow. When you evaluate a company, right, you're looking at its cash flow, not its net worth. Or what I'm looking at is, can I improve its cash flow? Because if I can improve its cash flow, I've improved the business. And that's the big mistake people make. They actually think their net worth is something, and then most times, because they've got liabilities listed as assets, their net worth is worthless. It's absolutely worthless. What really counts is this: how long can you live if you stop working today? My rich dad used to tell me, if you're 40 years old and can't stop working because you got bills to pay, you've mismanaged your money. It should only take you 20 years to become financially free, he told me. So that so many people today are still going out there looking for more money so they can buy new doodads and things rather than focus on the asset column. The reason I'm financially free is very simply in my brain is what my goals were. My goals were assets, and that's what cash flow trains you. It punishes you for making more money. It punishes you for buying doodads, and it rewards you for investing. And the purpose of cash flow is to train your brain to think like a rich person. And if it's hard and strenuous, it's because it's changing your thinking. So Dan, would you say something about why the game is hard for most people?
I've played it with a number of people, and the comments I hear is, it takes too long, or I don't understand this, why do I have to know this, or this is my favorite, I've got somebody else who will do this for me.
Right.
A great example is your average person who thinks of themselves as very successful, maybe making $100,000 a year, working for someone else.
Or they're self-employed. It means they can't quit. If they quit working, so does their business.
Right, exactly. So they're perhaps a professional, but they are the business. There's nothing over there that they could sell or liquidate. There's no other asset. Exactly. So they, in the terms of the world out there, are very successful. But they have 2 car payments and they have a house and they have
kids
a couple
in private school.
Exactly, kids in private school and saving up and orthodontia bills, da-da-da-da-da. Those are the people who don't want to worry about the game. They've got somebody else worrying about their balance sheet. But actually what I can tell you is they've got somebody else watching their balance sheet for the other person's benefit. Be very careful of the advisors that you choose. Notice a couple of things. One is, what kind of experience do they have? If they're telling you to invest in real estate, do they have any real estate?
Right.
Secondly, what's the benefit? I loved your example that you used of the banker who tells you keep buying bigger houses and bigger houses. Well, this is a little known fact, but at a certain income level, you lose your mortgage interest deduction. So it's no longer tax deductible. I've had a number of clients who suddenly come to that realization at the end of the year. The banker's advice to keep buying a bigger and bigger house, they lost a deduction because it doesn't count for them anyway.
Right, and this is the hard part you and I talk about, is when a banker says your house is an asset, is your banker lying or telling the truth?
Oh, it is an asset for him.
But it's not your asset, is it?
Yeah.
And it's never your asset because even if you paid off the mortgage, you still owe real estate taxes on it. And so the programming we've been conditioned to from the time we were born, get a safe, secure job, buy a big house, and then because you work harder, your taxes go up, and because your taxes go up, your accountant or your banker will say, buy a bigger house because you get a tax deduction. And that's the programming that I am working against. And what it sounds logical to 90% of the population is the main reason 90% of the population is broke. It's because they've been taking advice from people who are in the same boat as you are. I mean, I've really never met too many rich bankers. I've never met too many rich accountants. I've never met too many rich school teachers. But they're operating on this advice handed down from generation to generation from the industrial age. Well, I'm saying this, by the year 2000, we're going to hit some of the biggest economic changes ever, things we haven't seen yet. And, as Dylan says, you better start swimming or you're going to sink like a stone. These people with 401ks, I don't know if they realize this, but they can be wiped out in the next coming depression, which is overdue right now because we have a depression every 75 years. The last one was in 1930, so we're about due right now. And if I'm a historian of economic history, and if a person lives to 75 years of age, you will go through two recessions and one depression. Well, the World War II generation, my parents went through their depression, and they understand that's why they were savers. But the baby boomers right now have never really seen a bad down market. And I travel the world, just in Indonesia and in China and Malaysia and Japan, and that crash could happen to us someday. And most people are saying, well, we're America. The trouble is our government has ran up such a debt, counting assets as liabilities and all this, that we're precarious right now. It may not happen, but it also could. And I'm saying prepare for it.
Exactly. And you've got a key point there. We know change is coming. And I think to those listening, the question is how do you react to that? If you're excited by that, if you see a problem you can solve, you will prosper beyond your dreams in this change.
Thanks for saying that, because when I talk about doom and gloom, I'm not talking about doom and gloom. I'm talking about doom and boom. In other words, most people fail to realize is that when the rich really get rich is during times of economic downturn, and they ride the next upturn. And what happens with people who are not financially literate, not financially trained, is they're the ones who come in late to the party and then get wiped out of the top of a market, and then they lose all the money. And the money is transferred. It's transferred from those who are educated, uneducated, to those who are educated financially. That's why in 1987, the stock market crash was the best thing that ever happened to me. Everybody was crying the blues. But what they were losing was being transferred to people like me who had been trained in financial intelligence, all the things that the game cash flow teaches you. So cash flow is really designed to prepare you for these changes coming so that you'll be able to take advantage of the problems rather than look for old answers.
Exactly. And that also brings up another point that's very similar to what we were talking about with education. I know people that decide now after listening to this kind of thing, I think I need to go get an accounting degree. That is the wrong answer. What you need is financial intelligence, just like the emotional intelligence. This is something that's within yourself. It's not something you can learn from a book. You need some skills, basic skills you can learn from the game cash flow. You need to learn how to problem solve. That's the key.
That's right. And so cash flow is really designed for people who want to be A-type investors. If you want to just look for answers, the game will be long, boring, and tedious. The game does not take long. What takes long is learning the game. And I saw this one very high-paid top banker. It took him 6 hours, and the guy never got out of the rat race. And he turned to me and says, this game is terrible. He says, it's too slow, it's too long, it's too boring. And I said, thank you, and walked off. But you realize most bankers are employees. They're not investors. And what cash flow is really designed for are people who want to become business owners or investors. I think ultimately within 50 years, we're all going to have to be that anyway. The idea of a safe, secure job with the government taking care of you for your retirement is an obsolete idea.
Well, you're really raising some fascinating issues in terms of the learning problem. If I want to learn something new, how do I change my own habits? How do I change my own behaviors? If I've made the choice, I want to do this, and yet I find myself going through the same thought patterns and the same actions. So one of the things that I have discovered in playing cash flow is that if I play cash flow with people who are successful, if I change who it is I'm playing with, I can change my strategies.
Sometimes it's hard for me to look at the real world because most of my friends have lots of money. They're not concerned about bills. They have more than enough money to send their kids to school. They're excited that the economy is going up, and even more excited the economy might come down. And it's a different outlook, a different point of view. They're not looking for security. They're looking for happiness and fun, because for me, cash flow is not a game. Cash flow is really my life, and that's all I ever do.
Cash flow is looking for problems.
That's right.
And that is changing the way I think. So when I say, I'm going to look for a problem, I'm looking in the way the game is played, I'll go for the deals, the harder deals, which give me the opportunity to look for problems. But that brings me to the idea of how do I change the way I feel about these deals? And yes, I get scared. So one of the things that I realize is that practice helps me. So the more I play the game, the more ingenious I become in the strategies that I use. When my first time I played the game, I was dead in the waters after 3 hours, and I never got out of the rat race. The second time I played the game, I got out of the rat race in less than an hour and a half. And it was so stunning for me to have that experience. I couldn't really analyze what I had done differently. It was an unconscious decision. I was stunned. And when I started to get my left brain, my logical analysis involved in it, it took away all the fun I had in experiencing that hit. So one of the things that I have discovered since then is that there's an unconscious process that is going on.
But isn't that what you study in educational psychology? Is learning is actually unconscious.
Learning is unconscious. And as a matter of fact, if you try to bring it up to consciousness, you can actually destroy the learning that you've experienced. So I have an intelligence that goes beyond what I think I know. And that's counterintuitive. You know, Robert, as human beings, we can train our brain to see things that our eyes can't see.
That's well said. Is because there's an opportunity of a lifetime right in front of you every minute of the day, except that your brain has not been trained to see it because your eyes can't see it. What you actually see is actually in the brain. It's income statement, balance sheet, it's communication systems, it's taxes. It's all the things the eyes cannot see, and that's why people who can see sometimes are completely blind when it comes to money, when it's sitting right in front of you all the time. So the object of game cash flow is play it enough times so you begin to train your brain, number one, to think differently, to look for different goals, and to begin to analyze with your mind what your eyes cannot see. Because there's so much abundance. There's so much opportunity. It really shocks me when somebody says, I don't have money. I can't afford it. What should I buy? And it's because, very simply, I'm not making fun of it, is we've been trained since children to go to school, get good grades, look for a nice, tasty, secure job, and expect the company or the government to take care of you. And that's also what we look for if we're programmed to think that way. And cash flow is designed to unprogram that so you can see the bounty and the abundance and the fun right in front of you, not the fear of losing.
Well, you're talking about a profound shift in our consciousness. And I think it's as profound as when I look out at the world and I see the world is flat. But my brain, my vision, my knowledge is different because I've had the benefit of seeing the Earth from the point of view of an astronaut going up into space.
From the perspective, it's called.
Yes, we have a different perspective. But that's what cash flow can help you bring to your own brain, a different perspective about looking for those deals that create abundance.
And there's millions of them. Diane, we talked about earlier, people say it takes a long time to play the game. I saw this young woman take 20 minutes to get out of the rat race and onto the fast track. Cash flow is on two tracks. It's a dual track game. There's a rat race, which most people are programmed to get into, and then there's a fast track where the hardcore capitalists operate. And to get onto the fast track, you have to change your perspective and think differently. But I've seen this young woman get out in 3 moves. So the objective, I say to people, if it takes you 6 hours the first time, see if you can get it down to 2 hours. And eventually, if you can get out of the rat race 3 times in a row under an hour, your brain has been changed permanently and you will think differently. That's what I guarantee you. But if you play the game once and you say it's all too hard, I don't understand the words, this is boring, or as Diane says, I'll let my accountant handle it for me, then you've made a decision at that point to be in a group B type of investor, or a group C, which says, I don't have any problems here. I'm not going to deal with it. Cash flow was designed for people who want to become investors, or people who want to be better at managing their cash flows, because it's not how much money you make, it's how well you manage the cash flow that you make that determines whether you're rich or poor. Because I've had a friend who made $400 million at the age of 35 and was broke by age 40, bankrupt, because he couldn't manage how much he made. And so some of the big fallacies that people have, if they think it's how much money you make or it takes money to make money, no. It starts with a foundation of cash flow management, of knowing simply the difference between an asset and a liability, knowing that the government is your greatest expense, is taxes, and then debt's your second largest expense. So what would you say about that, Diane?
When you talked about managing money, I think the first thing you have to know is how to measure it. And I'm not telling people they have to learn how to do debits and credits and the technical things that accountants and bookkeepers do, but rather be able to look at a statement at a glance and say, oh, I've got a problem here. When you learn that skill, you can look at a company and take a look at their financial statements and say, this is a good buy because I can fix this problem.
That's correct. I don't look at the numbers. I look at where the cash is flowing. If somebody's vacuum cleaning your wallet every day because you think that boat is an asset, then you better start changing your thinking on what an asset or liability is. So most people, their problem isn't the amount of money they're making, it's which way the cash is flowing. Is it flowing out of the expense column or back into your pocket? And it's really quite simple. That's what cash flow is designed to do. So for people to take control of their finances, because if you don't take control of your finances and start acquiring assets, you're going to work hard all your life for other people, for the bank, for the government, and you'll wonder why you're working harder and not getting ahead. But it starts with a fundamental change inside your head of what are you looking for? What are your goals? If you stop working today, how many days could you survive if you stop working? Our assets feed us whether we work or not. And this is the trick I want to say to people is the moment I had enough income from all my investments, my real estate, my apartment houses and all this, I got richer simply because I had more free time to look at more deals. And that's why the rich get richer, is because their assets are providing them the time to do what they really like. And somebody says, well, what do you do for fun? I said, everything is fun. Because looking for deals is fun, playing golf is fun, taking trips with my other friends are fun. So we look for deals. That's all we do all day long. But it starts with fundamental cash flow management. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I love that idea of the fun, too. And in the game Cash Flow, we have these two different tracks that you're on. And you get out of the rat race when your passive income exceeds your expenses.
Right.
In other words, the money's actually working for you and is able to cover all of your expenses. There is a point where that happens, and suddenly there's this incredible freedom.
You've seen that, right, with some of your clients?
Absolutely. I've experienced it.
Right.
And just from firsthand experience, when that happens, suddenly life becomes lots of fun because you can look for deals, and if I decided to take 6 months off, I could take 6 months off. I don't need to worry about that.
And isn't it true it takes less and less money? And people says it takes money to make money. No, it doesn't take money to make money. It takes experience to make money and knowledge to make money. But if you lack experience, you lack knowledge, then it takes lots of money and lots of risk. And the more knowledge and experience you have, the less money it takes and the less risk it takes. And that's why the rich get richer. But if you've been programmed and you cannot let go of that fear of job security or I got to do it by myself, I'm going to be self-employed, I'm going to be a man of myself and all this stuff, and I'm going to work hard and make lots of money and spend it, then you'll never, ever experience freedom. You may experience security or some semblance of security, but never the freedom that money can buy. And that's why rule number one that my rich dad taught me, the rich do not work for money. What you need to learn is how to have money work for you. So that's why I build businesses, and with my businesses, I invest in assets. And that's the secret of the rich. And that's what cash flow is designed to teach.
When you talked about the person who wants to continue working hard, I keep getting that image of the person on the treadmill. They're secure because they're on the treadmill, but if they stop, they're thrown off the back. And that's what happens in real life if you're counting on a security of a job. What happens if you lose that job? You're downsized or you get injured. Right. What happens?
So if we could summarize right now, we could go around the table and say if you had 2 tips, so Diane, what would they be?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is to choose your advisors, but still remember that the responsibility for decisions is your own. Somebody else can't tell you what to do. You need to do it yourself.
And if I could piggyback on what Diane just said, when I interviewed Diane, she was going to advise me or be my CPA to take care of the things I do not know. The thing that I was most impressed was that not only is she a CPA, she is an investor. In other words, her profession is a CPA, but she minds her own businesses. And she has lots of assets in her asset column as well as her profession, her self-employed profession as a CPA. That moment, I knew we were on the same wavelength. The same as real estate agents. There's good ones and bad ones. And when I choose a real estate agent, I want to make sure that real estate agent is also an investor. Because most real estate agents are salespeople, the same as financial planners. Most financial planners, bless their hearts, but they're selling insurance. And you need that stuff, and you need to know their tax strategies. But you'd be very careful on who you take advice from. And the same with a banker. Find a private banker, because it's hard to explain to that ordinary banker in the supermarket that I don't have a job, I don't have any income, and I don't pay much in taxes. They said, well, you can't get a loan. I said, aren't you terrible? Aren't you sad? I said, no. See, to not have a job, to have not much income and pay a little in taxes, to me is very smart. But to the average banker, that's really stupid. But to me, that makes more sense. I have to find a banker who that makes sense to. Otherwise, we don't even communicate. So that's what I mean by advisors.
Before we go on, I'd like to say this as well. You are smarter than you think. You are smarter than what your teachers have taught you. You have an incredible learning machine. Your brain is so flexible that you are learning all the time. You can choose to learn in such a way that you are having fun as you experience problems.
Thank you. My tip is this. One of the biggest mistakes I hear people say is, well, do what you love and the money will follow. That's not my experience. A big part is to do what you love, but you also need to know, what do I need to learn even though I don't want to learn it? And that's the key to intelligence. In other words, I can't hire somebody to go to the gym for me to work out. It's my body. I got to go to the gym. I got to work out. So the definition of intelligence is knowing what I need to learn and what I can lay off on somebody else to learn for me. And there's certain things you must learn. Of all the things that have made me most money, I didn't like any of them. I didn't like cash flow management. I didn't like systems management. I didn't like communications. I didn't like taxes, and I didn't like product knowledge. I didn't like any of that stuff. I liked history and economics. And if I had done that, I'd been a great professor, but a broke one. So what my rich dad encouraged me to do is to learn, to know what you need to learn, even though you don't want to learn it. And for me, learning those 5 steps is the main reason I'm free. I don't need any money. I can make money without money. There's no project too big or too small. I mean, whether it's a duplex or the Taj Mahal, I want to say the biggest tip of all is intelligence is knowing to learn what you need to learn, even though you may not want to learn it. And if you do that, then what you love will become more effective. You'll be able to reach more people. You'll be able to spread your passion. But if your passion is only confined to what you know, then all you're going to do is be a self-employed person working hour by hour and working hard all your life, and struggling financially. And that's not too intelligent. What's your tip?
Okay, this is the hottest investment tip you can do. Invest in yourself. That's the key, because I could tell you to go buy an office building in Phoenix or Houston or Austin or whatever, and tomorrow the market might fall out. But the key is, if you educate yourself, if you take the time and energy it takes, and money too, to learn the lessons, then no matter what happens, you'll be ready for incredible success.
If I could piggyback on that one, because a lot of people think investing is go out and buying something. That's the last thing you want to do. Buying something is the last. That's like a lot of people think golf is hitting the golf ball. Well, golf is not hitting the golf ball. It's all the preparation you go through prior to hitting that golf ball.
Not only invest in yourself and educate yourself, but be willing to experience both the failures that you'll experience as a learner, just like a baby learning to walk. The baby doesn't go right foot, and the baby goes right foot, left foot to learn to walk. And every once in a while, the baby will plunk right down on his little diapered butt. You will too. And does the baby cry and stop learning to walk? No. The baby sometimes will even laugh, because in some ways that shift in the posture is itself exhilarating. So when you can change your experience of the failures that you'll experience as a learner, you shift that fear into fun, then you will have an enormous advantage over people who, after a failure, stop learning.
And my tip is this: if you want to be what I call the Class A type investor, or get out of the rat race of things, the number one skill is cash flow management. We've talked about it and why the game Cash Flow teaches. But I think Diane will back this up, is you've got to be able to keep records. I mean, you have to know where you are. In other words, you go to a doctor, and the doctor does a blood pressure test, and he reads you these numbers. And if you don't do that annually, you don't know if your health is increasing or decreasing. The problem with most people is they never do a financial checkup, and they wait until the day they're about to die when they realize they've had cancer, financial cancer, all their lives, and they look in and they've got a lot of income, they've got a lot of debt, and they've had a lot of expenses, and all that money has blown out the expense column. They have nothing in the asset column. The only way you can know moment to moment if you're progressing or declining financially is whether or not your income's going up, expenses going down, liabilities going down, and assets going up. And that's which way is the cash flowing. I check financially where I'm at on a monthly basis. Are my assets increasing or decreasing? Most people are clueless. They don't even know the difference between an asset and a liability, and suddenly they wake up and their banker says, you better shape up, or they just lose their job. You see, in the information age, the idea was that seniority counted. In the information age, seniority is a liability, because who has the most up-to-date information and who is most current that gets the job. So you have to keep getting educated, and one of the educations that's absolutely imperative, especially if you don't have a safe, secure job and you don't expect the government to take care of you, is you've got to pull the records, the diagnostic. You've got to know what are your assets. And the guideline I have is this: by the time you're 45 years old, you should be able to write a check for at least $500,000. Which means if you continue on track, you should have $1.5 million by the time you retire at age 65 if you're very conservative. But at age 45, if you haven't got that $500,000 you can write the check for, at least you have 20 more years if you live. From 45 to 65, you see our working ages are 25 to 65 approximately. We're completely incompetent at age 25, although we can't know he'll tell us that. And by the time you're 45, if you don't have it there in your hands, that means you don't have it in your head yet. And at least at age 45, you have 20 more years to get it into your head, because money only appears in your head, then it appears in your hand. If money is not in your head, it won't stick to your hands. And then we've seen a lot of rich people go broke really quickly. So that's why the diagnostic, and ask yourself this: can I write a check today? I mean today, liquid, $500,000. If you can't, then I would start rethinking what my thoughts are thinking. And that goes into mental as well as emotional. There's a story that I hear about Einstein. He was working at Princeton, and his undergraduate student walked up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, we have this graduate class. What test are we going to give him?" He said, "Oh, same test we gave him last week." And the undergraduate said, "But Mr. Einstein, we gave him the same test last week." Einstein says, "Yes, but the answers are different this week." That's what's happening right now, is the answers are changing. And if you stay with old industrial age ideas and not shift to information ideas, I'm afraid at age 65, you're going to be an old person wondering what happened to your life, riddled with financial cancer, even though you've been pumping weights at the gym for all that time. So that's my tip. You've got to become financially literate and take control of your financial destiny, and do it as early as possible. Now, for those of you who are over 45, always remember this: Colonel Sanders started at age 66. So he's never, what's the best time to start? And so now, however old you are, it doesn't take much. It's just focus on goals in the asset column. It doesn't take much money. It doesn't take much intelligence. It doesn't take much education, because I have done it that way. I've seen people, they try and do the big deals. It's not the big deals. It's the little deals that make the big deals. Always remember that. So the sooner you start, the better it is. But it first starts changing your thoughts, your ideas, and your emotions.
One of the things that I envision is that by 10 years out, we'll have people being able to have goals that are very similar in terms of cash flow and cash flow management. You'll be talking about returns on investments. You'll be talking about deals. You'll be talking about
internal rates of return, cash flow analysis.
And you'll stop talking about doodads.
Right.
And picking up that $17,000 boat, unless your assets have thrown off that money.
Right. My assets buy my luxuries.
Your assets buy your luxuries. What a statement.
I picture the whole thing as a pyramid, and at the very base, the foundation of all of the growth is the financial literacy.
Or cash flow management, financial literacy, financial intelligence. Yes.
Exactly. And the ability to measure where you are. And added on to that is, where are you going? There's great examples of people who suddenly win the lottery, win millions of dollars, and 3 years later are bankrupt. They were in trouble before they won the money. Money doesn't solve problems. People solve problems.
Right. Money accentuates the problem that's already there. I mean, many people who are poor cash flow managers, and their idea is, well, I'm going to start my own company. And what they do is they transfer their lack of education or their poor management into the company. And we have politicians that do that who've mismanaged our government. And so that's why I created this board game cash flow, to help people find out where they're at and then support them in going for their financial dreams. And the way you do that is getting educated, taking control, and thinking higher thoughts than what you've been taught to think a lot of times. My wife and I were homeless back in 1985, and less than 5 years later, we're multimillionaires. But it does take a change of heart, a change of gut, again, a change of thinking, a seeking new ways of thinking. And that's why I created Cash Flow. Cash Flow, what I suggest is purchase the game. It comes with 3 audio tapes and a videotape. Get together with 3 or 4 other friends and make this agreement, which is probably the hardest thing you can do because everybody's so busy because they're working so hard. And you say, we're going to play this game once a month. And if you play this game diligently once a month for a year, you will find your financial intelligence will grow. The game will become so easy. It'll be more fun because you'll get out really quickly. Then you bring your other friends who don't know anything about it. You rip them to, you play against them and you show them how much you know and you have a great time. But in that process, in the safety of playing a game, eventually your whole life will begin to change slowly. It's like changing the direction of the huge ship, the Titanic. You start steering it away from the iceberg, and you start changing your thinking slowly, because it is a slow process. But I promise you this, if you do that diligently, it will pick up speed. It's like going to the gym after being, sedentary for a long time. It's the first week that the pain is the greatest. But after a while, when your body starts looking a little bit better and all this stuff, finally you find yourself more excited about going back and working out, and pretty soon you're hanging out with friends who aren't watching TV and drinking beer. Your new friends are looking good and pumping weights and excited about their health. Well, the same is true for wealth. Wealth and health are very similar. The process is the same. It doesn't take long, but what it does take is a change of thinking, a decision, and a commitment to seek new goals, seek new ways of thinking, because the real change of wealth is not outside of you, it's inside of you. And the last thing is the economy is going to change, and really do prepare yourself for the changes, because it is during the periods of change that you have the most opportunity to get wealthy, not during periods of flats. So we're coming upon the spikes and the peaks and the valleys right now. If you're really well prepared, you'll make money very quickly, not slowly. But you have to do your side of it, which is get prepared. So you need to make a choice. Which three am I going to be? Which way am I going to go? And all three have different avenues or different directions, different information to seek. But it's a very personal decision. For those of you who seek category A, I would highly recommend acquiring the game Cash Flow. Find 3 other people, get them involved in it, and then play and play and play. If you want more advanced stuff or more advanced technology, we have our cash flow coaches, people who will support you through the program to go through because money is just emotion and thought. It's nothing to do with real stuff. Money is not real, it's just your emotion and your thoughts. So support you through that, get you out of debt, moving you forward. And we also have the business school for investors, for people who want to come in the real high flying, but at that point you can come and hang out with us at that level. So there's a lot of things to do, but the first step is you have to make a decision what you want to be, what you want to do, and where you want to go.
Today, Robert, Dr. Ann Nevin, and CPA Diane Kennedy have been discussing what Robert's rich dad taught him about money. In his closing statement, Robert said, first you have to make a decision about what you want to be. Reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad will help you with this most important first step. And since repetition plays such an important part in learning, especially when you are replacing old habits and ways of thinking, you will benefit by listening to this tape and reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad often. One of the questions most people ask after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad or listening to this tape is, how do I get started? That's why Robert created the game Cash Flow to help you develop the financial intelligence you need to decide what you want to do and where you want to go. Robert says the rich have an advantage. They learn about money at home and not in school. When it comes to money, they don't play by the same rules. That's because when it comes to money, they aren't playing the same game. Cash Flow levels the playing field. You can find copies of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad at major bookstores everywhere. Or you can order Rich Dad, Poor Dad and the Cash Flow program by phone. In the U.S., call 800-308-3585 all day, every day to acquire these valuable educational tools. You know the cliche about the longest journey begins with a single step? Your journey toward financial intelligence and ultimate financial freedom begins with a single phone call. When you call 800-308-3585, you'll be taking a giant step on your own path to financial freedom. Robert Kiyosaki, author of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, will tell you why the rich people don't buy mutual funds and what they do to build great wealth.
Hello, this is Robert Kiyosaki. I'm the author of a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a true story based upon my 2 fathers, one my real dad, my biological dad, and the other one was my best friend's father. The poor dad was my real dad, who was a PhD in education, very smart man, graduated from university in less than 2 years, went to Stanford, University of Chicago, and he was ultimately the head of education for the state of Hawaii. And the reason I call him my poor dad was simply because he was a high-paid government official. He made a lot of money, but no matter how much money he made, he was always broke about the 20th day into a 30-day month. So the reason I call him poor was that no matter how much money he made, he was still broke. My rich dad, on the other hand, was a man who didn't go to school. He dropped out of school at age 13 because his father died and he took over the family business. And so he ultimately became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. Most people don't know him because he was a very private individual. So starting from the age of 9, I was greatly influenced by both men. And the interesting thing was when it came to the subject of money, they both had very contradictory points of view on the subject of money. For instance, my poor dad always said our house is our greatest asset and it's our biggest investment. And my rich dad would say, man, if your house is not an asset, if you're financially illiterate, you'll understand it's not an asset. And if it's your biggest investment, you're in very big trouble. So for those who have not read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I think it would be interesting for you to read. It's very simple. I learned to be a wealthy person starting from the age of 9. Very simple diagrams and things like that. So what this tape is about the subject of investing. There is a difference between what the rich invest in versus the poor and the middle class. I'm going to tell you a story. I have a friend of mine here in Phoenix, Arizona, where I reside now, and he's a very bright young man. He's an attorney. He's making a lot of money. So he went to see his financial advisor, and his financial advisor advised him to, buy mutual funds, diversify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the problem with this young attorney was that his specialty is family law. And being in family law, occasionally one of the not so good parts about his business or his profession is that he has to divorce the very wealthy or the very rich in town. And the reason he came to talk to me, he says, here's my financial advisor telling me to buy mutual funds and et cetera, et cetera. And he says, when I divorce a very rich family or a couple, they don't have mutual funds in it. So I asked him, so what do you find inside their portfolios of the very rich? He says, I find two things in general. I find businesses and I find real estate. I said, that's true. What the rich generally do is, and the way they get rich is because they invest in businesses and real estate. And he says, so they don't buy mutual funds? I said, they may or may not, but it's not the way they get rich. In other words, you don't get rich by buying mutual funds. So what this tape is about is to clear up some of the differences between what the rich invest in and the poor and middle class do. And rather than have me yak at you all day long, one of the secrets of my success as an investor and as a business owner is that I don't have to be that smart. I mean, a lot of people are afraid, I didn't go to school or I didn't get good grades or I'm not that smart. Well, I'm not either. I didn't get good grades. But one of my secrets of success, or the hot tip, is to work with people smarter than me. I'm very pleased today to have my advisors in this room with me because they can probably give much more detail about these subjects than I can. So one of them is Diane Kennedy, who is my strategic CPA. She's a member of Mensa, which means she's a genius. She has a master's in taxation, and so she's far beyond just a CPA. The other one is Kim Butler, who is a financial planner who guides me through the mazes of taxes and protection and et cetera, which the rich do. So I'm very happy to introduce my two advisors. And so, Diane, would you mind introducing yourself first, give a little bit of your background, and then Kim?
As Robert said, my name is Diane Kennedy, and I have offices both in Phoenix, Arizona and Reno, Nevada. I specialize in business owners that have multi-corporations. We work together in putting together comprehensive tax planning for the high-income, high-wealth individuals. All of my clients then are wealthy individuals, business owners who invest in real estate and are interested in their future growth.
Thank you. And Kim?
Hello, I'm Kim Butler, and I am a certified financial planner. My background is banking. I was trained at a commercial bank and did a lot of commercial lending, and as I was going through that process, realized that the real wealth in our country is in the entrepreneurial fields and often connected with real estate as well. And as I delved into the financial planning arena and was trained through the insurance companies and the mutual funds, I began to see the differences in what the rich do versus what the poor do. And that's what we'll have some fun talking about today.
Good. So, as a person who's made quite a bit of money as an investor, I'm often asked by people, they say, I have some extra money. What would you recommend I invest in? Or, my broker said I should buy XYZ stock. What do I think? Or my friend recommended this mutual fund. Would you buy that? Or what are you investing in? And the problem with those questions, and oftentimes I appear vague and evasive, the reason is because for me, the subject of investing is not something I just say a yes or no to, or that's good or that's bad, because to me, investing requires, to be a professional investor and to be wealthy as an investor, requires a little bit more sophistication than just saying, I buy the dips, or I dollar cost average, or I diversify, or the PE is doing this, or the Dow is doing that. That's not sophisticated. I need more information to do that. The points this tape will focus on are very simple. Number one point is what the rich focus on as investing as compared to the poor and middle class. And I'm not here to make the poor and middle class right or wrong, or the rich right or wrong. I'm just doing my best to point out some distinctions or some differences between the three different groups. Number two, there's this fallacy out there that people think investing is risky. Investing by itself is not risky. Speculation is, which is saying that I think the price of the stock's going to go up or the stock's going to go down, I'm going to short it. That's speculation. What my rich dad taught me about investing is not about risk. Investing is about fundamentally doing the right thing so that there's a guaranteed result at the other end. As in the movie Wall Street, I'm not recommending this guy, but as Gordon Gekko, nefarious character in the movie said, he says, I don't throw darts when I pick a stock. He says, I bet on sure things. And that's what the rich do. And he did it illegal. I'm not recommending that. But I only bet on sure things. So that I'm saying that investing is not risky. And number three, the biggest message I want to say out there is that you don't have to be that smart. It's fairly easy, and it's just fundamental. And the reason I don't have to be smart is because I surround myself with smart people. One of the biggest mistakes I think people make is they think they have to know all the answers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living in the information age, and information is doubling every year now. It is impossible for anybody to have all the answers, and so one of your greatest assets an individual can have is high-qualified friends and friends in smart places, not necessarily high places, who can advise you. So, going over it really quickly, this tape is about what the rich invest in versus the poor and middle class. That is not supposed to be risky. Speculation is risky, but not investing. And number three is relatively easy. And what we're going to give you in this short tape is just a big picture on the whole subject. The other part about it is this, as a disclaimer, there are many ways to get rich. We're just going to share one way. If you're making $20 million a year as a movie star, you don't need this tape. If you want to find out how to get rich as an investor, we have some ideas for you. Number two, this is an educational tape. This is not an advisory tape. In other words, we strongly advise people, as I'm already saying, to get strong, competent financial advice as possible, because everybody's situation is different. So this is educational, not advisory. Don't go out and say, I told you to buy real estate or build business. I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm just giving you some education on this subject. And number three, this tape will work regardless of which country you live in. I oftentimes hear people say, oh, that's for the U.S. only, or that works in the U.S. And what they do at that point is they discount what I'm trying to say. For those that know me, they know I travel throughout the world, and while some of the laws may be different in their details, ultimately, as I travel the world, I find out the rich operate very similar in the same way, which this tape will cover. So for those of you who live outside the U.S., please know the laws may be different, but the principles remain the same. When it comes to advisors, I want to say this much, same thing. There's advisors for the rich, there's advisors for the poor, and there's advisors for the middle class. What would you like to say about that?
Well, I think it's so important that people ask the specialty of the advisor prior to doing any other kind of discussion. I mean, Diane, if somebody came to you and told you about their situation and then said what your specialty is, don't you think that's a little backwards?
Absolutely, Kim. In fact, I've had clients call me and say, I have $50,000 and I want to get rich. That was an actual phone call. That's pretty hard to advise someone when they have a very vague idea. I think the fundamental thing is, first a person has to know what direction they are going, what is right for them. They have to understand their own situation, and then decide what kind of an advisor they need. We talk a lot about what is the right investment for a person, but really only a person is going to know what the right investment is for them.
It's the idea of having the long-term goal or perspective or vision in place first, and then asking or seeking out the advisor that's going to have the specialty that will take you on the road to get there.
So what we're going into right away is a lot of people focus on the product versus the strategy. And what we're going to say to you right now is that to be successful is not whether it's a mutual fund or a bond or a stock or real estate or whatever, or Beanie Babies or Barbie dolls. It's the strategy. And what most people focus on is the product. Should I buy a mutual fund? Versus, well, what's your strategy? And the thing that we were talking about here is this, and it's one of my personal bugaboos, and Kim Butler said it very accurately the other day. She says, most people are planning to be poor. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I do. When you take a look at the strategies that people are using, and I'll reemphasize that part, it is a goal to be poor. And is planning to be poor what you want to be doing?
And people are doing it unconsciously, and they don't even know they're doing it. And I'll give you an example. When somebody says, I have a superannuation or a 401k or an IRA and all this, and I'm putting money, a 401k, they're actually saving money. They're not really investing. And they'll often say this line. They say, I can pull it out when my income is lower. In other words, that's a very middle class ideal, is that, let's say we retire at 65. When I'm 65, I'm going to be poor. That's what they're saying. So my income will be lower at 65. So they're unconsciously, subliminally programming to be poor. The rich have a different problem. By the time they're 65, they have too much money. And they have so much income that this little puny 401k or superannuation or Central Provident Fund in Singapore and all this, it's a problem because they can't pull that money out tax-free. And so what most people are doing via the advisors, the magazines, the television shows and all this, most of the advisors are catering strictly to the middle class and the upper middle class wage earner employee types. But the rich cannot think that way. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. When you take a look at the strategies that are written about in the magazines, that are talked about on the newspapers,
and on the radio,
you're right. Everywhere you have to go to the author of that article and consider the source. And oftentimes you have to ask yourself, is someone that's making $40,000 living in New York City even
writing for a newspaper?
Right. Even investing money themselves. And it's just like we talked about earlier. The long-term vision of what you want to have happen is where you need to keep your focus and not be taking advice from people that may have a different vision. In fact, one that you don't even know about because you don't know the person. In addition, when you think about the strategies that are most often suggested, you have to take a look at the strategy, not the product. And just like the rich do things differently in their lives that we see, they're doing things differently in their lives that we don't see. In their financial life, they buy insurance differently, they buy mutual funds differently. It's not the product, it's the strategy that they use behind it.
And from me, I see the tax planning is so much different. For example, in the United States, one of the divisions this year has stated that within 5 years, 10 million Americans won't be filing tax returns anymore. They're going to automatically assess taxes, such as we see in European countries. That's very significant for evidence of what's happening in our technological age.
I want to say something about taxes. Is most people think of taxes as only income tax. In other words, they say we work until July for the government. Well, it's actually worse than that, because the real reality on taxes is we're taxed when we earn, we're taxed when we spend, we tax when we're saved, we tax when we invest, we tax when we lose money, we're taxed when we win money, and we're also taxed when we die. So taxes for most people are the number one expense. So part of the strategy, and this is where Kim comes in, and one of the things my rich dad taught me was the importance of insurance, because insurance is a way of minimizing or sheltering ourselves or protecting ourselves from the ravages of the government. For those that listened to my first tape with Diane Kennedy, in America, if you're an employee or you're self-employed, it's very tough to protect yourself from the government, because the government is taking their money before you even get paid. Is that correct, Diane?
Absolutely. We talked also about the newly self-employed person. A lot of people think I can get out of this by quitting my job and starting my own business.
Yeah, home-based business, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and they're really self-employed.
Absolutely. What they've done is they've bought themselves a job or created a job for themselves. They just work for somebody different themselves.
And that's largely because of the structure that they've set up, right? The lack of a corporation,
plus a plan and plus a vision and plus knowing the difference between a small business owner and a guy like Bill Gates.
Right.
And what most people become are self-employed small business owners. And I mean this with great respect. I feel sorry for them, because it is the hardest position to operate out of. If you're successful, you have to be self-employed also stands for super person, because for my first year in my own business, I spent 3 days out of the 5 fending off the government in so many rules and regulations. And that's what happens to a person that says, since there's no job security, I'm going to start my own business. And they go from employee to self-employed. That's why I wrote this book, Cash Flow Quadrant, which is the book right after Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's part 2 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's about the difference between a self-employed person and a business owner. And there's very big differences mentally, emotionally, and psychologically. So what we're saying here is that, first of all, is your strategy as to what do you want to become as your years go on. And unfortunately, most people in the middle class are already subconsciously programming themselves to be poor at age 65. We're quite shocked at thinking about, most people, they have kids. Let's say they have 4 children, and they struggle financially to have
private
schools and the new house and the cars and the soccer and et cetera, et cetera. And they say, life will be good when the kids are finally out of school. And so finally, 30 years later, all the kids are out of school. And what's happening, you're saying, for many people in America today, they have 4 new kids moving in. And it could be their mom and dad on the wife's side and mom and dad on the husband's side. And so that's what's happening. Is that true?
It's very true. I see it in my client base a lot. It's called reverse parenting. Your parents come in to live with you, and that vision is missing, that dream, that goal of where you want to be.
Right.
But isn't it true that most of the people have been set up for that? They've been told, get a job, or else start your own job, and buy a house, buy a big house, and invest in a pension fund.
Buy mutual funds.
Exactly. And they're not building assets that are going to create other income streams.
And shelter from taxes.
Exactly. Right. So they're paying a large tax load. A self-employed person pays the highest percentage in taxes because they're paying additional taxes. But the key is that they have set up a plan to be poor.
Right.
Just like their parents did. So they all get to live together.
Which brings up a point is, let's say we go forward to the year 2010. How optimistic are you that there will be such things as Social Security and Medicare, and in the countries throughout the world where I go to, can the government afford to take care of the millions and millions of people who are planning to be poor?
I think the issue of any kind of structured deal, and that's what it's looked at, is a government deal, is about the worst thing that you can rely on, because it has...
That's planning to be poor.
That's right.
Really
it has
poor.
An entitlement attitude of, someone else is going to take care of me.
Looking internationally at the demographics, I'm a numbers person. I love to look at these. The baby boomer generation is international. All countries have experienced that. And as this group moves up and gets older, that means there's less people to pay for them. The numbers don't work.
Today it's for every retiree, there's 3 people paying for them, and in a few years it's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio.
Right.
So not only will you be supporting your mom and dad, you'll be supporting everybody else's moms and dads out there. And that's what we say. If your intention is a company or the government's going to take care of you, that's really planning to be poor. And what most of the middle class are planning to do is they plan to be on lower income status at age 65. So what this audio tape is about, and I'm not making either one right or wrong because it's a free country, you can make your choices on it. I already made my choice how to plan or how to come up with a strategy to be rich, and that's what this tape is about. And so, Diane, also there's a fallacy in the what I call the middle class dream, is get a safe, secure job, buy a big house, and then invest in mutual funds. And that's okay for most people, but there is a hidden flaw in that thinking in the tax code. Is that correct? Because you make more money, you buy a bigger house, and everybody says, well, I get a tax write-off for a bigger house. There's a flaw in that thinking. Isn't that correct?
That's a predominant thinking in the U.S. because we have a home mortgage deduction. And as people make more and more money, they then think, I need to buy a bigger and bigger house.
So they get further in debt.
Exactly. But the tax code has a phase out of the mortgage interest deduction as your income gets above a certain point. That is a huge shock. I've seen many clients every year suddenly, I have write-off of $25,000 in interest, but you didn't get to take any of it. So that is a true expense with no tax benefit there.
So you're saying if you make a lot of money and you buy a big house, there comes a point when you pass this threshold, you're making so much money, the government says you're no longer allowed to deduct the interest on your house?
That's absolutely correct.
So
It makes the house become just like all of the paper assets that our current environment suggests that we have. And you really have to look at your asset base and determine whether it's a true asset. In other words, does it put money in your pocket, or is it really more of an expense?
Kim has got an excellent point. A fundamental issue is, what is the definition of what an asset is? What is the definition of a liability? And as a CPA, I see that there's an incredible value to being able to read accurately your numbers. What does your financial statement really look like? Not what your financial planner puts together, who's an outside party and doesn't understand you, but do you intuitively understand where you are?
Your own financial position.
Exactly, and where do you want to go?
And that's what I covered in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, was my poor dad, the school teacher, said word literacy was everything. And what my rich dad, he said, don't listen to your best friend's father because he's illiterate. But my poor dad was financially literate. I mean, he could read numbers. And also, I've said this many times, that people that can read numbers have more power over those who can only read words. Because being financially illiterate in this world, you oftentimes need to take advice from what Kim was talking about, some writer for some newspaper who's making $40,000 a year giving you financial advice.
Well, actually, the numbers do tell a story. That's where the literacy comes in, is when looking at a financial statement. Can you tell what that story is?
Is it a story of hope, or is it a story of tragedy? You know, he worked really hard and he died broke. Or he started off slow and he became a mega billionaire, you know, and the numbers will tell you that story. So the second part of this tape, we're getting into what the rich think about that the poor and middle class do not. And most importantly, I think Kim said it most accurately, is that what the rich think about is a strategy, not the product. And that was my rich dad. Very, very simple strategy for me personally. Since the age of 9, I knew these simple steps. Now, if you don't understand it, don't worry, because like I said, I hire or work with smart people. I don't have to be that smart. I just have to know where I'm going. So the strategy was very simple. I have to build businesses. That was my strategy. I buy real estate. And what the poor and middle class buy, so real estate is a tangible asset, and what the poor and middle class buy are paper assets. So that's why they feel so insecure subconsciously, because most of their assets are paper, and their job is tenuous. And as self-employed, you have to work very hard, and the government, everybody's after you in that place. So the difference between rich and poor, the strategy was to buy real estate because it's a tangible asset. Number 3 was to hire the best advisors possible. Number 4 was to protect yourself with insurance. That was vitally important all the time for my rich dad, was that the product of insurance to cover us. And also understand, step 5 was to understand corporate entities, i.e. the difference between an S corporation, a C corporation, a limited partnership, and a limited liability, an LLC corporation. And again, if that's overwhelming for some of you, please don't worry, simply because it's stuff I don't understand either. I just knew I had to do them if I was going to start thinking not like a middle class or a poor person, but to think like a rich person. And so those are the 5 simple steps. When I was a young boy, my rich dad told me this story. And the story went like this. He says, this is the difference between an investor and everybody else, or a business owner and everybody else. He says, there was this village. And I was 9 years old when he told me the story. There was this lake. And he said the village needed water. So they put it out to contractual bid who could bring water from this lake a mile away to the village. And these 2 gentlemen bid for it. And both got the contract. So gentleman A, what he went out to do, because it was quick and it was easy and it was fast and it didn't cost much money, was he bought 2 buckets. And so he's running back and forth through the village from morning to night. This is an employee or a self-employed type of person, lugging these 2 buckets back and forth through the village. Person B is thinking more like a business owner and investor. And what person B does then instead is he goes out, hires an architect, gets an engineering firm, hires investors, goes to the stock market and all this. And instead of hauling buckets, what he does is he puts in a pipeline. And so what my rich dad said to me, he says, if you want to be rich, you build pipelines, you don't haul buckets. And so what's happening for most people is every day they have less and less time, they're working harder, they're making money, the government's taking it, and they're not building pipelines. What I'm going to be talking to you, the strategy. The strategy I had was to build pipelines. And after I built one pipeline, then I go and build another pipeline, and then I build another pipeline. So I may have started off slower I may have made less money than the person who was an employee or self-employed, which I cover in Cash Flow Quadrant quite a bit in my next book. They're going back and forth making more money, but it's actually short term. And they're planning to be poor at age 65 because there could be less income because they're going to stop hauling those buckets. And what the rich are doing instead is the strategy is to keep building pipelines. So at age 65, it's just more and more money is pouring in on them. And then what they need is insurance or protection. And the protection is provided on the pipeline because there's people who want to stick holes in it and take some of the profit, should we say. And the number one sticker of holes in the thing is the government, and number two are other people, people who sue you, etc., or you make your own mistakes and you lose money. So the way the pipeline is covered is via insurance or via corporations. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. When you talked about the various strategies, so often people have a very junk drawer approach to their financial situation.
That's correct, yeah.
And, the kitchen junk drawer, you buy a hammer, you throw it in there, you buy a mutual fund and throw it in there. There's no difference.
You got a hot tip. Somebody says, you should buy 10 shares of this high-tech company. So you buy 10 shares and you drop it in the junk drawer.
Absolutely. And just like this person with the buckets, that is a junk drawer approach. It's a piecemeal, unholistic picture of trying to get a job done quickly without having that long-term vision in mind.
They're taking shortcuts.
Exactly. And again, I think that really goes back to what you want to have happen. So if you have a strategy in place,
which is building a pipeline.
Correct. And, in fact, let's pause there and go back to ways that people can build pipelines early on. I mean, there's so many opportunities in variety of different networking things that they could be doing, or an insurance career where
that's a good point. That's what I want to bring up. The moment you start thinking strategically versus product, versus whether it's a mutual fund or real estate, the moment you start thinking strategically in a pipeline, there's more than just real estate, bonds, and mutual funds to build that pipeline. One of the things we recommend in building a business is network marketing. Network marketing is a way of owning, it's an information age type franchise, where that you work really hard, but if you work really hard today, it pays for years and years and years. The same thing as an insurance career, is that correct?
That's correct, and that will build a pipeline, and then furthermore, you can use strategies like insurance to protect that pipeline, because the protection component has to be in place as you continue to build your wealth.
Which is what I'm saying real quickly, is I always say there's only two kinds of money problems. Problem number one is you don't have any money. And problem number two, which is another problem, you have too much money. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
And both types of problems require different kinds of advice and different kinds of insurance. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
They have different strategies entirely for those two different instances. Also, on your idea of either the insurance career or the network marketing, multi-level marketing, I have a friend who's a general agent, and he was telling me the story of how hard it is to recruit people into insurance, because they usually end up having to work really hard for the first couple of years, and they're dealing with kids right out of college who, they can go to work for the bank at $30,000 or $40,000, and why would they go work at this insurance agency and maybe make $20,000 the first year, not realizing that after they've done it for 10 years, they've got $100,000, $150,000 coming through the pipeline without even working.
Or not. Yeah.
That's right.
So the question is, for all of us at any age, do we want to just keep carrying buckets, or do we want to start building a pipeline which has an investment in the beginning, but just like interest compounds, that work will compound and give us great rewards?
I'm thinking long-term versus short-term. And what I find with most people is they want job security, or they want to make a quick buck. I can make a lot of money by being a consultant, or I should start my own little business, and they want money right away because they got bills to pay. I don't blame them. A business owner and an investor must think long-term. So what we're saying here is this. My rich dad said two things. You build businesses, and that could be network marketing. I don't recommend anybody I've been trained most of my life to start companies, and I wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemy, because it's a lot of work to build something like Bill Gates did, or Michael Dell, or Branson out of England. That's hard work. But today it's very possible for people to build their own businesses via the insurance industry, because you're building up residual or passive income. And I think that's a big subject for accounting. Isn't that correct? Passive income versus direct income?
Absolutely. The earned income, which is what a self-employed person does, is the highest taxed. You have to pay a self-employment tax. Passive, you don't have that.
And that's a big difference. I don't pick this up here. I don't make it too complicated. There's income that you're taxed on, income you're not taxed on. And what the poor and middle class do, they say, I'm a good, hardworking man, or I'm a good, hardworking person. The trouble with being good and hardworking is that the government takes the largest share of taxes from people who are hardworking. People who are generating income, either passively or residually, pay less in taxes, oftentimes get tax breaks. So this is all part of the strategy. So if I could review it again really quickly, you build businesses that have residual or passive income in it. And that's why, as far as investing goes, that's an investment strategy, because you're thinking a reward for long-term, delayed gratification versus short-term gratification.
And don't you think that not only does sometimes the investment have to be in dollars, but also in time?
Well, there's only two things you can invest, time or money. And most people say, well, I don't have any money. I said, well, then invest the time. And that's why I recommend, if you're going to build your own company, good luck. But network marketing is good. There's good companies and bad companies out there. But if the company is proven and successful, then it's not the system that's going to fail. It's just you that's going to. You just work the system, and it'll pay buckets of water day in, day out through the pipeline, while your friends who took the high-paying job are hauling buckets. You go out and build the second pipeline, the third pipeline. And when you're 65, you got a big problem called too much money, but then you call Kim Butler and you say, I need insurance to cover too much money now. Is that true?
That's right.
And so most people are hauling buckets, and they plan to stop working and become poor at age 65, clinging to their mutual funds, which are paper assets. And the problem I have with mutual funds is taxes. I don't know if most people realize this, is that the difference between real estate and mutual funds is in mutual funds, you can make no money and get taxed. In other words, you make no money and you have to pay money in taxes. That's the problem I have with mutual funds. Plus, they're paper assets. Mutual funds as an investment vehicle. I'm going to tell you a story of a vehicle. Investments are just vehicles. For instance, I want to go from LA to New York. Well, you can walk, you can take the bus, you can ride the bicycle, take the train, you can take a truck, you can hitchhike, you can take the shuttle, or you can take the jetliner. Which one's up to you? To me, a mutual fund is like riding a bus. It is slow. Some people make a lot of money, granted, but for the average person, they don't get there fast enough with it. On top of that, you're taxed. What's the thing about taxes on mutual funds?
Well, the biggest part with mutual funds is the traditional way of just owning them. I go invest in ABC fund. I have no control over how the investment goes or when I get taxed. Whereas with real estate, for just as an example in the United States, if I have a building that's appreciated $500,000, I can do a like-kind exchange and defer the tax. I can choose when or if I'm going to pay tax on that.
Right. Well, most people say, I bought a stock and the price went up. Well, in real estate, it says the price went up also. The difference between a stock going up or a mutual fund going up and real estate going up is a stock and mutual fund, you're taxed on it. With real estate, I can take all those gains, as they're called, and not pay any tax on it. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right.
So that's how I get rich quicker.
And what else do you have from real estate that you do not have from mutual funds?
I have passive losses.
And cash flow?
And cash flow. I mean, the reason I don't have to work is because one of my pipelines is my real estate investment corporation, which is in a C corporation. All the property is held in limited partnerships. Now, if you don't understand that, don't worry, because that's where you hire a smart person to tell you how to do all this. I have all this income coming in. On top of that, a lot of it's tax-free because I'm depreciating my property. The government says, the reason I know this is why the rich do this way, because the government is rewarding you for going this way. It punishes you for going stocks and mutual funds, and it rewards you for going to real estate and to owning your own businesses. You got to look, why do the rich go that way? Because the government wants you to go that way. Is that true?
It's actually amazing when you think about it. With a mutual fund held the traditional way, you have a paper asset that you have no control over.
Subject to market forces.
Exactly, that are totally out of your control, that you have to pay tax that you might not have any cash for.
Right.
As opposed to a business, which because you designed the pipeline, you have a lot of control. You have managed the risk by having good advisors with good insurance in place and good tax planning in place. Again, you're controlling the pipeline, which could include real estate or your businesses.
Right. And what Diane and I were just working on this, I don't have one corporation. I have multiple corporations. I do it legally, as a way of doing it, which you hire good advice for. What she's talking about, if I make too much money in one corporation, I just don't pay the taxes the way the employee, the government takes it before you get it, and self-employed, the government takes it before you get it also. I can move my income from one corporation to the other and offset it against paper losses. There's real losses and there's paper losses. And real estate allows you to take paper losses. The stock market, when people say I took a loss, that's real loss. I mean, money actually came out of your pocket. With real estate, I can take a paper loss, which no money came in my pocket. In fact, money actually came into my pocket, and they give me a tax break upon it also. Is that correct?
That's true. And as you're talking about all this, I'm sure we've got people listening that then want to ask somebody about it, and they're going to hear, oh, you can't do that, it's illegal.
And that's where the advisors come in, right, Kim?
Absolutely. It goes back to asking the specialty of the advisor. And you've got to get someone that knows what they're doing in that arena. And those questions need to be asked up front. And I would even go so far as to ask to see what that own advisor is doing.
And that's one of the 5 steps my rich dad told me, is the reason you want to have good advice is because most people will tell you you can't do it. And the reason they can't do it is because they don't know how to do it. They've never heard about it before. They don't make enough money to do it. And they're planning to be poor anyway. Growing up in a family of intellectuals, all PhDs and all this, it made me crazy, because just because you have a PhD in ant entomology doesn't mean you know anything about the stock market or taxes or corporate law or mutual funds or real estate or businesses. And a lot of times because you have a good high school or college degree doesn't mean you know anything about the strategies of how the rich get rich. And I'll say it again because it's worth saying. They build businesses. They buy real estate because real estate offers capital appreciation tax-free and also losses tax, gives you tax advantages. They shelter with corporate entities, not personally. The poor always want to own everything. The rich control everything via corporations. They have good advisors, and they use insurance as well as corporations as a way of sheltering when they don't have money and when they have money. That's the strategy. You can do it any way underneath of that. But that's the strategy of the rich. They build pipelines. They build one. It may take them 30 years to build the first one. It may take 7 years to build the second one. It may take 4 years to build the next one. By the time they're 40, they can put a pipeline in every other year. And that's why the rich get richer and the poor haul water buckets. One more thing I want to say about real estate, that was my strategy since I was a kid. I knew only 2 things: build businesses, buy real estate. It's not that hard. But when somebody says, stocks are much better, well, stocks are a vehicle, especially for capital appreciation or capital gains really quickly. I agree with that. The problem with stocks I had was that since I didn't have much money, if I went to Bank of America, let's say, and I wanted to buy $100,000 in stocks, would Bank of America loan me the $100,000 on stocks? The answer is no, because it's a paper asset. But if I say I want to buy a $100,000 house, the bank smiles, brings out a loan application. In other words, I could leverage my money much faster through real estate. So let's say I put $10,000 down in a stock and it went up 10%, that means I made $1,000. And I paid taxes and all that other stuff on it. But if I put $10,000 down on a $100,000 piece of real estate and it went up 10%, I got 100% gain, because 100,000, 10% is $10,000. Not only that, I got to write off most of those. I got to depreciate my property as well as take those capital gains tax deferred. Now, I never do anything for the tax reasons, but this is part of my strategy. In other words, what makes me upset is I see people taking losses. For instance, in Australia, it's called negative gearing. And it's a good strategy, but it's a strategy actually if you have a lot of money. It's not a good strategy if you don't have a lot of money. To take a real loss, there's real losses and fake losses. To take a real loss for the tax advantage is really insane.
Well, the numbers don't work. Again, coming back to numbers, because I'm a numbers person, but let's say you're even in a 50% tax bracket by the time you add up everything. Why spend $1 to get 50 cents in savings? That doesn't make any sense. I think you should just prepay your accountant.
That's right. I'd rather hire it, but most of the average person who's an employee really does not need an accountant. Is that true?
Oh, that's absolutely true. In fact, we talked about how in the U.S., within the next 5 years, the government's going to do your tax form for you because they have all the information on employees anyway.
Right. So the point that Diane brought up, which I like also, is that the issue of control. The problem with paper assets is that your control is in the market. I mean, you're out of control. Who can tell what the market's going to up and go down? If the moment you say, I think the market's going to go up, you're speculating because you don't know. With real estate, I have more control. And what makes real estate risky for most people is the issue of debt. But I can control the level of debt. When somebody says I can buy it for $0 down, well, that's good if you got a real steal of a deal, and it makes a lot of sense. Anybody can get a $0 down or no money down type of deal and pay too much for it, which is not the good way. So there's no real answer. I've always said life is not a multiple test. it's a multiple guess. You're always guessing. But the reason I like real estate, although it's slower, which is good for my personality because I'm slow, is that I'm in more control of it. I can also, by using it to shelter my income I can move my income around, whereas an employee and a self-employed cannot do that. I can shelter my income. I can move it around. I control the amount of debt. It's not dependent upon necessarily market forces, where the price is going to go up and prices go down. It's just dependent upon rent. How much can I rent this thing for? If the toilet breaks, that's an expense, so I factor in expenses on it. I control that. I control vacancy factors. That's all part of financial literacy or understanding numbers. But that's very easy to do. People say, well, I don't want to fix toilets. Well, I don't fix toilets either. I have a management company to do all that. I don't do any of that. I just take the advantages. I take the money. I take the tax-free capital gains, I take the losses, and I shelter my business income against my real estate. That's part of an overall strategy. I have Kim to help me with a structure now. That in this stage of my life, I have so many pipelines coming in. I got another problem called too much money, whereas a few years ago I didn't have enough money because I was building. All my money was going into building this pipeline, and now that the pipelines are coming in, all of a sudden I shift from a problem of not enough money to a new problem called too much money, which is one insurance problem when you have not enough, and you have another insurance problem when it's too much. And now Diane I see her more and more often because the problem is I have too much money. Is that correct?
That's true. I also like the point when you were talking about buying and leveraging. One of the things that I see as people move up in their assets and they start taking on more and more debt and more income, they sometimes don't have a strong enough financial foundation, and they don't have the literacy to handle, the financial literacy to be able to handle that, and that's when the system collapses. That's when we see the...
it's called making a mistake.
Absolutely, yes.
And we've all done that, and that's why you need insurance not to protect you from somebody else. You also need insurance to protect you from yourself. Is that correct, Kim?
Yes. And I think when you take a look at all of the other strategies aside from real estate, you have a financial institution that's involved. And you have to think behind, again, just like looking at the author of an article.
You're talking about the financial, be it the bank or the mutual fund company or the stock company or the brokerage firm or whatever. You have somebody with a vested interest in it. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And guess what? Those companies are in business to make a profit. And so you have to look at their agenda. And the agenda of a financial institution is to get your money, to get it on an ongoing basis, to hold on to it as long as possible, and then give back as little as possible.
And the rich don't do that.
That's right. They're in control, not the financial institutions.
And that's when people say, I'm putting money aside for the long term. You're playing right into a financial institution like a mutual fund or a pension fund or something. Is that correct?
That's right. And letting them make money and build their storehouses instead of you building yours.
Right. You always say it's called the velocity of money. And what the poor and middle class do is they park their money. There's no velocity on it. It just sits there. And they wonder why they're struggling, why they're rich. I'm constantly, my first question is, if I invest in something, my question is how soon do I get my money back?
Right.
Because I want to invest in something else. I don't put it in there for the long term. So when I acquire a piece of real estate, let's say the price, let's say I buy it at $100,000, goes to $200,000. If the fundamentals support it, I might just borrow out that money tax-free because I got my money back. In fact, probably 10 times more of it, and I'm buying 10 more properties. That's called velocity. Whereas with the people who are saying, yes, I'm in the long term, I'm investing in my retirement plan, there's no velocity. That's called parking it.
Well, and we go back to our first point we made is, what is the long-term strategy? If you're planning to be poor, then follow the advice you're seeing in all the magazines and the newspapers. However, if you want to be wealthy, you're going to have to step outside of the mainstream in some of your thinking and your advisors that you have.
Good. I know this may sound overwhelming for some of you who may have never heard some of these things before, but I just want to give you a ray of hope and tell you a little bit of how to get started. For me personally, I think Diane will back this up and Kim will back this up. The hardest part for somebody, in school, since you only learn to read words, the hardest part is financial literacy. When I was a little boy, my rich dad, not my poor dad, my poor dad had me read books, which was good, but my rich dad had me read financial statements, and he had me do financial. I sit there and write them out, do it, and he'd say, what are your numbers? What are your numbers telling you? And I hated it. I just absolutely hated it because I was not good at it. And he had me analyze investments, analyze his real estate, analyze his company, analyze a stock offering, analyze this. And that was the hard part. When people say they invest blindly, that is true. The reason they invest blindly is the numbers let your eyes see what your eyes cannot see. And so that's true. So if you want to increase your vision, you have to have financial literacy, the ability to see. So that's my rich dad pounded into me. The reason that's good news is that I created this game called Cash Flow. And the reason I created it as a game is because numbers don't ever stand still. Is that correct? Numbers are always moving.
Well, you know, that's also, I know that with Kim, she's talked about a traditional personal financial plan where somebody has it. It's this incredible document with lots of colored graphs, and it has a picture of that moment, and 5 minutes later it's outdated.
It's different, yeah.
Right.
And the reason I created Cash Flow is, number one, was to teach you accounting. You know, I charge $195 US for that game. It comes with 3 audio tapes and a videotape and all this. And, well, that's a lot of money. I said, well, obviously you haven't been to business school, because the hardest subject for me ever in my whole life was accounting. The reason it was hard because I was sound asleep in the class all the time. It was difficult. So I created Cash Flow as a game, and people say, well, it's for my kids. No, I created it for adults to teach their kids. The kids don't have the problem. The adults have it. And if it's a game, what's happening is dynamic. The numbers is moving. It's changing. And nothing goes the way you want or expect it anyway. The market is always changing. So what I do with Cash Flow is teach accounting. And wouldn't you say, Diana, it's the hardest part for people is they don't understand their own personal numbers?
Well, I think they have total blinders. They don't want to see what the numbers are telling them, and instead they want to fool themselves. They want to think that the house is an asset, that the big screen TV is an asset.
The vacation home and the car and the second BMW.
Right. Those are all assets, quote
unquote.
Their
banker and the real estate agent and the BMW salesman told them they're assets.
And whose assets are they? The bankers and the real estate agents and the BMW company.
Right. When the banker says your house is an asset, they're not really lying to you. They're just not telling you whose asset it is. The word mortgage comes from the French word mortier, which means death. Mortier is death. Gage means an engagement. So mortgage means an engagement until death. And that's what Kim was saying, is what the financial institutions want you to do is they want to get your money, and then they want to get it on a regular basis. And that's what a mortgage does. It's their way of putting their vacuum cleaner into your pocket. That's what happens to the poor middle class, too, who are not financially literate. Would you agree with that, Diane?
Well, yeah. In fact, actually what they've done is they've built a pipeline. It's just that you're the one who's shoveling the buckets of water to fill the other side of it.
Yeah, there really is. Most people are attached to the pipeline. They're just at the wrong end of it, unfortunately. It's like the cell phone company. They'll give you the phone, but they want that monthly payment from you. Same as insurance. They want you to make that monthly payment. Nothing right or wrong with it. But the reason the poor middle class struggle so much is that they're at one end of it versus the other end of it.
Well, the other part is that they are looking at just the product instead of taking a look at overall strategy.
Right. So we created Cash Flow so that you could look at the strategy. You could learn a very tough subject called personal finances, income statements and balance sheets, and have fun while you're doing it, simultaneously analyzing a deal. So Cash Flow, so the good news is this, we made it easy. I think I made the toughest part easy because we made it a game, we made it fun to learn. It's repetition. You know, it's $195, but try to go to business school is thousands of dollars. You know, to spend hours analyzing deals at my rich dad, that's thousands of hours in time, and I can consolidate it into one game. For less than the price of a used TV set, you can have this game, and repetition is the way we learn. The more you play it, the smarter you get, because every single time the situations are different. You're taught to analyze, number one, your personal financial situation. Secondarily, you then analyze the investments. Does this investment fit, number three, my overall strategy? So the good news is that we've made the investment part easy, so you can analyze your personal investment and then analyze your strategy. So the good news is, for the first time, it is easier and easier for people to become wealthy the way the rich do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the other thing that I've played this game dozens and dozens of times, and you draw different cards, so you step into different roles, and it gives you the opportunity to learn how investments that might work for you don't work for the other guy. And that's the way it is in real life. And so you're in a safe environment learning what can work in different situations.
Yes, plus my investments today, what I invested in 2 years ago, will not work for me today. Would you agree with that, Kim?
Right. It's the strategy that matters and the timing of it. And what a better environment to learn that than in a game.
That's right. And it's you have a little fun because there's a little competition. It's more ego than anything else because you don't want to lose. You recommend it to your clients? Why do you recommend it?
Because of the ability to learn and to be faced with the issues at hand. Diane mentioned earlier, a lot of people they're purposely blinding themselves, where when you can step out of your own environment, play a game, have some fun with it, it teaches you a lot about life and also about investing and reading those numbers and understanding the strategy that you should be implementing.
Thank you. And as an accountant, don't you see that's what hurts most people is they're not clear on their numbers?
Oh, absolutely. They, first of all, don't understand their own numbers because the bankers told them the big screen TV and the second beamer are all assets. And so how can they possibly...
They have a big net worth,
right?
I think very funny.
Yeah, and jewelry and all of these things that really aren't
Golf
giving
clubs.
them anything. Armani ties. We can go on and on.
But they all count to your net worth.
Right. And they aren't giving us any income. Then how on earth, with having an inaccurate picture of where you are to start, how can we really expect anyone to make good investment decisions when they really don't know what they want anyway?
They're blind. They're investing blindly.
Right.
And it also forces you to have a long-term perspective and maybe forgo some of the short-term goodies that you might get to get the win in the long run.
Right. And if we could talk about really quickly how insurance works, because all part of this is as you're building this, you need insurance when you have no money.
Right.
And then you need insurance when you have a lot of money. So at this point I want to say it's really quite easy. The hardest part is handled by cash flow and Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and for a few dollars you can learn as repetition. And then you have to start. And you can start that, and it's not that hard. You start buying and selling of this. But what kind of insurance do you have when you're starting versus when you're rich? Can you tell us in a nutshell what it would be?
Yeah, I think so, because just as in all things, there are strategies for the poor and strategies for the rich. And when you're at the poor level, and many wealthy people start out at this level, and
I was very poor.
So was I. There's nothing bad about it. You have the opportunity there just to protect possibly your income. And so literally you buy insurance to do that. You buy disability insurance, life insurance in that manner. And then as you begin to grow and your asset base increases and your capability for not only earned but unearned income increases, you have to switch strategies. It's not the product, it's the strategy that you use. And so you switch into environments and permanent insurance is one of them, that give you tax benefits, that protect your assets, protect your pipeline, and really close up those holes that the government is trying to poke in.
Right. I think one of the saddest things that happens to people is, they believe in owning everything, but the rich don't. Rich control. But what happens is they work all their lives owning all this, and when they die, the government takes it. Is that correct?
That's right. And insurance can play a role there as well, because if you really hate insurance companies, well, then let the insurance money go to the government, and you keep yours for your family.
That's what the rich do. They control their wealth even after death. They do it via trust, insurance. And right now I'm talking to Diane because I have several pipelines in place. The money's starting to pour in. It's another kind of problem. And that's what you're talking about. It's what's called split dollar life insurance, and
I work quite a bit with Kim with some of my high wealth clients that are running into the same problem that you are too. Nice problem, but you still have strategies you need to put in place. It's interesting, though. I think there's more misinformation about insurance in the media than any other subject. One of the things that I'm always hearing is you buy term life insurance and invest the difference in mutual funds. That is a strategy for the poor and middle class.
That's right.
It does not work for high income, high wealth people who want to shelter that.
And again, go back to the sources. Where are the authors that are writing the articles that are suggesting that? And they are in that poor and middle class. And as quickly as you can, if you want to get out of the poor and middle class, you have to start doing what the rich do. And the rich do not buy term insurance. It's a waste of money.
So, again, I'm saying the brightness of the future in this whole thing is that the hardest part about becoming wealthy was the financial literacy part. So cash flow was created for that, because that makes it very easy. If you understand numbers very well, then real estate investing is a very safe, secure, it's just common sense. If somebody says to me, I should buy this piece of real estate because the price is going to go up, I say, well, will you guarantee that? And they generally say no. In other words, if a piece of real estate doesn't put money in my pocket today, in other words, if it's not making me money today, I don't buy it, because I can't shelter it necessarily if there's no income. I don't want to spend why would I waste my time paying for somebody else to live in my house? So it's just common sense. And so we say, well, how do you find a good deal? Well, that takes time. I look at probably 20 deals a week looking for the deal. There's an old saying, you kiss 1,000 frogs to find one prince. Well, you kiss a lot of real estate deals to find that one that works for you. And the thing, that's a tangible asset. Well, most people, because they don't have time, they buy intangibles, which are stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc., because they don't have time. There's a trade-off in here. So the good thing about it is the numbers have become easy via cash flow. If you need to start a business, network marketing, I recommend more than doing it my route, which was to start my own companies. Because starting my own companies, the risk is not the market that's at risk, it's what I don't know that's the risk. I mean, I've learned, I have scars across my back. My wife and I have been homeless for a few days. I mean, I have made so many tragic mistakes trying to build a system, a pipeline. Network marketing company is a pipeline. If it's a good company, is already established. All you have to do is learn their system, and pretty soon, the cash comes in. And that's labor intensive, not money intensive. So if you don't have much money, then you've got to go labor intensive. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, because you said earlier you either invest time or money, and in time you have to do both. But the critical thing with the network marketing or an insurance opportunity is that you have time, you can invest time, and you don't have a big capital requirement to get started. And then you begin to build a pipeline, as you said, and it's so important right then that you start that long-term vision, surround yourself with advisors that know what they're doing, and begin to start doing what the rich do.
Right. Remember my poor dad, being a school teacher, he was very angry when some of his teachers or coaches would quit and go into insurance. He says, they're just doing it for the money and all that. And he thought that was stupid. Well, my rich dad thought it was a very smart move. He says, those guys who are doing insurance, they may work hard and not get paid much today, but each time they work, they build this base up and the residual income, which is key, isn't it, Diane? Residual income versus direct income?
Absolutely. The residual means that the money comes in whether you get out of bed that day or not.
You can play more tax avoidance strategies with it?
Absolutely. It also frees up your time for looking for more deals. Once you have your nut, we call it, your basic expenses covered by passive income, that creates a tremendous freedom then.
And that free time is what allows people like me, because one of the reasons I wanted to get rich fairly quickly and help my pipelines come in place was to have more time to go look at more deals. And that's what I do. And that's why the rich get richer and the poor and middle class haul water buckets and plan to be poor at age 65. That doesn't make any sense to me personally. But as Kim Butler says, it was a strategy more than the product. So more than just mutual funds and stocks, a career or profession is an investment also. The question is, does it have long-term value or just short-term cash value? And that's the way you think. So the good news here is this. It is more possible than ever before, even though you're not a super athlete or movie star, to still become wealthy. You can start your own businesses very easily because network marketing companies cover that, or you can buy a franchise, which is kind of expensive, and you can start a career in insurance. Then what you do is you buy real estate. And the good thing about real estate is just like me. It's just dumb as dirt. I mean, it is just common sense. If it doesn't make sense, don't buy it. If it doesn't make a profit, don't buy it. But that comes in the numbers, how you analyze one. It's just common sense. It's not a matter of what are the PEs, the Dow's doing this, what's this mutual fund guy doing. And it's none of that stuff. The derivatives markets, the options markets, the stock markets, the shorts, calls, puts, all that stuff. You don't have to do it. I'm as dumb as dirt. The cash comes in. I get capital appreciation. I don't have to pay taxes on for now. And I get tax write-offs. I'll get paper losses. They're not real losses, but I keep more of my money. So it's build businesses, acquire real estate, have the best advisors. And the reason I can't know it all, in the industrial age, you had to be smarter than everybody else. In the information age, you want to have people smarter than you around you. So that's why I have Kim and Diane around me, because they're more attuned to what they do better than I can. I sit there, I'm doing it this way. What do you think? What do you think? And they'll give me it's up to me eventually. But I still seek the best advice I can. Most people ask their poor brother-in-law or their school teacher or their next-door neighbor who is just as broke as they are for financial advice. Or the reason they call them brokers, we at real estate, stock, mutual funds, whatever. The reason they call them brokers is because they're broke. And they're giving you advice about something they really don't have a strategy. They're trying to sell you a product, not tell you about a strategy. And the other part then is you look at corporate or legal entities, S corporations, C corporations, LLCs, and limited partnerships. Personally, because I own companies. I own C corporations. And I control C corporations. I also have C corporations and limited partnerships for my real estate. Now, if you don't know anything about that, well, neither do I. I hire the smartest attorneys and incorporators to do that for me. I don't have to know anything. I know 3 things: know my numbers, build my businesses, and buy real estate. It's dumb as dirt. So I'm trying to say to all of you, it is not that hard. It's actually much easier than what the poor and middle class are doing. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's just taking one little step at a time and building on that and knowing that it isn't going to happen overnight and spending a little bit more time and talking to some more people and picking your plan carefully.
Your strategy.
And then having that strategy in place to implement it. Absolutely.
And to piggyback on Kim's comment, this idea of what your plan is, we've also talked about advisors, but your friends and relatives also play a role in that. And obviously we're not saying never talk to your parents again because they'll have a different idea, but carefully look at the people you spend your time with. And
who influence your thinking.
Exactly. Right. And what do you spend your free time doing? Maybe that's the only time or resource you have available right now, but taking little baby steps in the right manner, instead of watching the game show, play cash flow.
It's like going to the gym. You work out your brain for a while. So I want to thank the two of you for your time and your contribution to me personally. If I could review really quickly, that the rich, the poor, and middle class very simply have different financial strategies. Step 2 is that what the poor and middle class do, they focus on the product, either mutual funds, bonds, and all this, rather than the strategy. The strategy and where you want to go in your life is far more important than what you buy. I'm not making mutual funds and stocks wrong or right. You can get rich by doing those also. You can get rich by doing Beanie Babies if you like. You can buy gold and still get there. It's not the product, it's the strategy overall. And number 3, it's never been easier before in the history of the world, because before most people couldn't buy their own businesses, and most people don't go to school to learn about numbers, and that's a hard subject. So, cash flow and the game's made it quite easy for people. And number 3, hang out with people who know more than you. If an advisor says you can't do that, find an advisor who says you can do that. Which comes to the point of all is I have mentors. I have advisors, I have mentors, and I have coaches who are around me. And I surround myself with people who have my best interests at heart, not people who are trying to hold me back. So if I could end, there's always a story of the tortoise and the hare. The rabbit just ran out really quickly, but eventually the tortoise won. And the reason the tortoise won, as Diane was telling me, is that the keys to coming from poverty out into wealth, when there's a study all through the world, was they had a long-term vision. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
It's the slow and steady process.
Right. They knew exactly where they were going to go. They weren't planning to be poor. I'm going to withdraw this money when I have less money. That doesn't make any sense to me. I want to have much more money at age 65 than I went at 55. And that's my plan. So they have a long-term vision. They delay gratification. And what most people do is they go for short-term pleasure and long-term pain. And I do it, when I eat. I like to eat, but the pain is I get heavier long-term, so I've got to change that short-term thinking. But financially, a lot of people go, when they get frustrated, they go shopping or they buy something like, a new dress, I can feel better. So they feel better short-term, but they're paying long-term on it financially. Or I don't want to invest the time to study this stuff, so I just keep working harder. Well, that's short-term and long-term. And the third thing is compounding. And compounding is, everybody talks about the power of compounding interest. Well, everything compounds. Your knowledge compounds, your good habits compound, as well as your bad habits. Is that true, Diane?
Yeah, I see that so many times that over my years as a CPA, I've had clients that start off and consistently are trying to learn about their business, constantly making it better and better. And those clients are multimillionaires today because they have taken the little baby steps, they've compounded that knowledge, and learned from their mistakes as they went.
Yeah, I learn a little bit each day. Isn't that true? Every day things are changing. You learn every day you learn something new, right?
Absolutely. And what was right 10 years ago or for somebody else is not right today. And it's your own ability to just take and continue to pursue those steps. And sometimes you got to backtrack, but you got to have that long-term vision in place.
Right. So the most important thing is that the tortoise can beat the hare if necessary. A lot of times the hares play the lottery or they go to Vegas and they want to get rich quick. But in my experience, if the tortoise has the intention of just building pipelines, having good advice, they can get there, and they probably get there safer, stronger, and they pass it on for generations to come. And that's the way the game is played by the rich. They don't just buy a hot tip on a stock or take the advice of somebody that really doesn't know what they're doing. So there's a plan, and it's up to you. You can do it the rich, the poor, and the middle class way, and it's up to you. I've got one tip, okay? Is that there's 3 kinds of money. There's survival money, there's real money, and there's play money. So for the first years of my life, I was doing my best to just get enough money to survive on. and I was saving and investing to get real money. And real money goes into either blue chip stocks or real estate. For me, it's real estate simply because of the bank loans, the leverage, the tax advantages. So there's survival money, real money, and then there's play money. And it's the play money I speculate with. I like to play. I'm not into drudgery and hard work. I like the nice vacations. I like all those things. But now at the stage of my life, I can play with a lot of money. So I can invest in these high-flying stocks or the IPOs or the more things that people call risky. The reason is because it's play money, it's not real money or survival money. Unfortunately, what a lot of people are doing is they're trying to play with their survival money, or they're trying to play with their real money, and eventually they wind up broke. Most of them, I would say that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and it's because their goals are not in line with what they're actually doing.
With their strategy, where they want to go to.
And that also illustrates very strongly the point of what's a good investment for you might not be a good investment for me.
That's correct.
It's not the product, it's where you are, what's your plan.
Very well said, because a lot of times they say, what are you investing in today? Well, I'm building a gold mine in China and an oil company in Portugal and Colombia. Would you advise you recommend investing? Heavens no. I mean, that is so speculative and so risky. But if I lost it all, it doesn't affect my survival money or my real money. And that's a very big difference out there. So I want to thank the two of you very much. I've enjoyed making this tape about what the difference between the rich, poor, middle class invest in. So before we close, Diane Kennedy, any last minute words?
You know, the thing that I see every day is that numbers are really the key to financial success. When you look at a financial statement, do you have the ability to tell the story that is behind that?
Is it a tragic ending or a happy ending, right?
Exactly. And if it looks like it's going in a tragic way, what does it take to change that? And I want to say that there's hope for everyone as long as you're willing to face it and work through it.
Very nice. Thank you. And Kim Butler, my financial planner. What do you have to say?
Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with everybody the opportunities that are out there, and to just say that you really have to keep the big picture in mind, be willing to take the baby steps along the way, and surround yourself with people that are supportive in your goals. If someone tells you no, turn elsewhere. It's out there and everybody can do it.
Thank you both very much. So in closing, I want to say this. My rich dad told me this years ago. There's only two things you can invest: time and money. And most people are working so hard carrying buckets, they don't have any time, so they just take their money and they say, here, take it. You know, you went to Harvard, you must know what you're doing. Or you have a PhD, you must know what you're doing. What my rich dad said to me is this: people who invest the time always get the money, one way or the other, from those who don't have time. So please invest in your education, because this is what this tape is about, and always seek the best competent advice, and invest the time before you invest the money. Thank you very much.